Yo, yo, yo. Oh, we better turn that off too. Hmm. Showing what now? Hmm. Check.
Bitty bitty butter.
Pap, pap, pap. We'll go a couple minutes past. I don't know why this doesn't. let's see where this goes. So let's kick it off. Welcome to the first installment of Stress Less. My name is Steve Shelton. I'm the CEO of Green Shoe Consulting. We are launching this series as a bit of a test. Excuse me. I and my organization research, talk about, and help folks with stress and burnout in terms of not only educating, but teaching the skills necessary to have a different relationship with stress, to alleviate the symptoms that lead towards burnout, and prevent those things. And so we work not only with individuals in teaching those skills, but also with departments, organizations, because there's a variety of components to it that are somewhat the onus being placed on the individual employee, but the larger component or responsibility really falling on the organization. So the goal of this we'll get into in a second, but really what we're wanting to do is teach some simple skills to help you be able to have something to go to in those times where you're starting to feel that stress creeping up in a way that is negative. So we're going to jump into this in terms of what this looks like. We have a 4-part series scheduled. This is the first of 4. And so I wanted to highlight a few things. One, the skills that we teach, they are skills that everyone can benefit from because they help performers in all kinds of environments, not only in your job, but your personal life and hobbies, in whatever it is that you're trying to do and perform at. Be able to help you perform at your best and be able to help you identify when you're not at your best and give you skills to combat that and change and move back into your best, something like that. So while I have just highlighted the primary skills that we're going to teach in each one of these sessions, they don't sound that complex or that profound. However, I will encourage you to have an open mind because of the fact the skills that we teach are not necessarily the skills that human beings default to. Our default is really focused on human beings want to avoid pain. We want to go towards pleasure and things that feel good. That's why when things get hard, a lot of people turn towards alcohol, drugs, things that give an immediate type of fix to the stress that they're feeling. But the fact is it doesn't really fix the stress. It just covers over it. So what this gets into is a different way of thinking and being. Essentially, it's kind of the concept of we all know we need to exercise, right? There's a very visual, tangible aspect to exercise. And you think about the fact, like if you wanted to run a marathon, if you haven't been training for a marathon, you're not just going to go run 26 miles. You're going to start small with foundational aspects of your training to get used to the fact of being on your feet for an extended period of time, the amount of cardio that it requires, the amount of endurance and all those things. So you're going to build up to that. This is the same concept. So most of us are not doing the practices daily to train our minds to be able to manage and regulate our emotions, our thought processes, or be aware of the thought patterns that have developed over however long you've lived on this planet and really understand if that's serving you or if that pattern is not serving you. Most likely, all of us have developed patterns that don't serve us. This is the start to be aware of those patterns and do something to reframe or change those patterns, replace them with something more effective and something that will serve you and help you. So, with that being said, these are simple statements in terms of the skills, but the challenge is, will you be committed to practicing these things and really see the benefits that come out of practice? So that's the first thing. Secondly, desired outcomes and objectives. Our outcomes and objectives are to educate you and the community on stress as a whole, how it works, how our brains work, to help you increase self-awareness so you're aware of when you are feeling stressed and you have the ability to take intentional action to resolve that negative stress that you may be feeling. In addition to developing practices and habits, like I said, but these are habits of effective leaders. This is a really important thing to be aware of because of the fact So many times we get caught up in an ideal that a leader is a title, a position, the way that somebody acts within an organization. And to an extent, that kind of leads into my point that leaders aren't just in a position or a title. Leaders, I believe that better people make better leaders, and we all have a responsibility to lead in our own lives. So that's a big deal. And then the last one is possibly the hardest challenge that we're going to face in doing this work is that the environments that we're in, traditionally, I spent 20 years in corporate America. Corporate America is not a place that typically is talking about or wanting to hear about the mental and emotional challenges that we're facing as individuals that would take us out of being our best and performing at our best. So the challenge has typically been you have a job to do. I don't care what's going on with you, perform or get out of the way. That tends to lead more to high stress and burnout. And it tends to deny the very aspect of our humanity that really denying those things eliminates our ability to be authentic and show up as our full self. Doing that then eliminates the ability to tap into that potential that is lying there waiting to be engaged because we all want to feel like we belong in the workplace. We all want to feel that we're competent and have the skills to do our job effectively. And we all want to feel a sense of autonomy, like having control over our own lives and the work that we do, and understanding that there's a requirement or expectation of our roles, but how we actually deliver that is on us, that we have the ability to decide how we're going to do that. So that requires an environment that fosters trust of you as an individual, but also a psychologically safe environment that traditionally is not and still does not exist in a lot of different workplace environments. So, what this environment is going to serve as is that psychologically safe environment to be able to express what's getting in your way and preventing you from being your best, and then provide some skills on how to work with those things and really change how we're looking at those challenges and change how we're showing up and executing. So, with that being said, I would like to offer or encourage that we all set some intentions for today. First of all, what are you looking to get out of this session or out of this series? What does success look for you at the end of the session when we're done with this? What would you need in order to feel like you actually accomplished something? And then also, what are you bringing into this learning and development opportunity? So, one is, are you going to be able to be present and not distracted by thinking about things that have been happened today, yesterday, the week before, the year before, whatever it is? Or are you also focused on things that you need to do in the future? That you have something to a deadline to meet, a meeting to prepare for, whatever it is? Do you have the ability to put those to the side and be present in this? Because that's where you're going to get the most value is being present, soaking it in, and really giving everything that you've got for the next 40 minutes. With that being said, also, you have a lot of insights and wisdom. You may not always feel like that, but you do have a lot of what I refer to as gold. That when you show up in a space, you have something of value to contribute and share. I encourage you to bring that into this space. And then, last of all, how can you show up to help create that? How can you let go of any concerns, fears, anxieties that would prevent you from sharing and taking a risk to open up and allow others to see what's going on with you and really seek to make the change that you want to see in your life? Those are the things I want you to think about as we move forward. And then, because of the fact we're in a virtual space right now, I'm really focused on how can we create the most effective environment for us to learn and grow together. So I'm open to, if you're comfortable having your video on, I would love to be able to see your face, your body, your reactions, your body language, and all that stuff, because that's one way that we connect in this virtual space. But also, if you're not comfortable with that, I totally understand. And I'd rather you be here with your video off to be able to get some exposure to what we're getting into, to really see how it connects and moves you, if it does at all. The only other thing I would ask, I know we all have obligations and things outside of this, but if you can put your phone on vibrate or mute and silence some of those notifications so you're as focused as possible for this, I would greatly appreciate it. You'll get the most out of it. And then as your facilitator, my job is to communicate my preferences, my desires in terms of engaging with you, and try to get some of that discussion going that'll help everybody out in this process. With that being said, I'm not going to jump into the expectations. I think we may change that going forward. But one of the challenges I see in a lot of spaces, including and especially corporate America, IT, and cybersecurity, is the fact that people show up expecting that just because we use the same words, it doesn't mean we have the same exact meanings behind those words. We all come from different experiences, different environments, and different teachings. And so the challenge really is when we're trying to communicate and understand somebody else, not to assume just because they used a word that you understand that we have the same meaning. It's a very important aspect of communication. So what I want to start off with is creating a definition or sharing a definition that we're going to utilize for stress and for burnout, so we're on the same page and we fully understand what we're talking about. When we talk about stress, stress has gotten a negative connotation in being a fully negative thing. In our context here, it's going to sound negative, but I'm going to add some components to that. So our definition for stress is a state of worry or mental tension caused by a difficult situation. It's a natural human response that prompts us to address challenges and threats in our lives. That statement is going to be talked about and covered multiple times in terms of challenge versus a threat. I'm going to leave it at that. Burnout then is a response to chronic stressors in the workplace. It can happen outside of the workplace, but we're going to focus on workplace for this specific series. It's a response to chronic stressors in the workplace which have not been managed successfully. That's a very important thing because for many of us, again, we have not been taught the mental skills on how to manage our mental and emotional states. Understand, I'm not saying that you will not feel extreme stress, chronic stress, or burnout. It's not just on you, it's also on your environment. So the challenge is understanding what we have control over, focusing and putting our focus on what we have control over. Because many times when we get frustrated, angry, irritated, annoyed, it's because we're focused on things outside of our control. So that's a big aspect to stress and being able to manage it, is knowing what we have control over. Now, types of stress. I just gave a very big clue as to the fact that while stress has gotten stigmatized as a major negative, we actually need certain kinds of stress to motivate us to take action. So there's a good stress and a not good stress. The good stress we refer to as eustress. Eustress is more of a positive type of stress. It's what allows us or drives us and motivates us to take action and do whatever we're seeking to do. The challenge is the distress, the acute stress and the chronic stress that we experience in regards to our environment, in regards to a task that we're having to accomplish. The acute stress, it says episodic. It's really based on a certain situation. It doesn't last for a long period of time, but it's a very specific thing. I'll give some examples after this. But the challenge becomes is when it becomes chronic. Chronic stress is stress that lasts for more than 21 days. So you're experiencing the stress for an extended period of time, and it's causing mental, emotional challenge, anguish, if you will. It's interfering with your ability to feel your best and to perform, and it gets really, really challenging in that mode. So eustress, the positive stress, so to speak, is the type of stress that gets into starting a new job. There's that feeling of excitement, a new environment, a new fresh start, and a variety of positive possibilities. There's unknown, but it's a new fresh start. You can chart your own path. Excuse me. Getting married. I got married right before COVID. We went as small of a wedding ceremony as we could. It was still very expensive, a lot of planning, and the lead up to it, all of the work that went into that one day created a lot of stress as well, but it was for a positive situation. So that's eustress from a high level. Acute stress then is when you're stuck in a traffic jam. If you're in Chicago like I am, there is no rhyme or reason to when the traffic hits and when it doesn't. So that aspect of getting hit in traffic when you have somewhere to be, when you're stuck into a crowd, right? Being surrounded by people, especially if they're not in a positive state, if they're angry, if they're unhappy, whatever it is, if they're trying to get somewhere and you're stuck, not a great situation to be. A loud noise is something jarring, right? It's scary. It creates that initial survival response, which we'll get into also. Those types of things. There's a short period of time where that happens, right? Chronic then becomes, again, it's long periods of time where it's extended stress. So your workload, cybersecurity is got a reputation, and rightfully so, because it exists everywhere, of having to do more work than the resources and the people that you've got access to. Autonomy, that's your decision making capability. Do you have the ability to make decisions and enforce them? The values, the big thing for me. Do you know the values that you hold that guide your words, thoughts, and your actions? How do those align with your department and with the company that you work for? A lot of times, the words, the thoughts, and the actions are really important because somebody may say one thing, but they may act a completely different way. That's a conflict then. How can you trust somebody when they say something but do something in contradiction to that? It's really hard to trust when they show that they're not in alignment with those things. Community is, do you feel like the people that you work with, not only in your department, but in other business units, the salespeople, the vendors that you work with, um, uh, just different areas of the ecosystem around you, do you feel like people have your back and are working in your best interest? Or do you feel like the knives are out and that they don't have your back? That people are jockeying for positions to get promotions and it's a zero sum game, right? Those types of things. Signs you may be stressed. I'm going to hit on a couple here, and then I'd like to hear from you all what you're experiencing. So, one, when you feel stressed, and this is not the eustress, this is we're getting into acute stress, right? And chronic stress. Typically, what you'll find, some of the things that people experience are problems with their memory. It's a big one for me. Drives my wife crazy. She may have said something to me yesterday, the week before, but because of the fact I've got so much going on, I may not be in a relaxed state where I've got full cognition capabilities and I'll forget stuff. Trouble concentrating. It's really hard to do work when you're stressed. You may exercise poor judgment. You may choose to do something not knowing that your fears or anxieties are driving that. You may focus only on the negative side of things. This is a big deal. Again, when we're focused on things that have happened in the past, which we cannot change, or things in the future, which we are not fortune tellers, there's an aspect of our fears and anxieties come into play about what could happen. And when we're focused on those things, typically it's negative things that we're focused on, right? We're fearful of something happening negative. If I do this thing, I'll get fired or I'll get in trouble or whatever it is. That coincides with having anxious or racing thoughts. If your mind is just spiraling down that negative rabbit hole because you're stressed, that's a signal. These are all signals, right? Constant worry, such a big deal. There's three areas in terms of like what we focus on in terms of how we're interpreting or experiencing our stress. First one is from an emotional standpoint. We've got physical symptoms or signs, and then how we choose to act when we're feeling stressed, right? How do you feel like when when you're stressed, how do you feel emotionally? Do you feel balanced? Do you feel happy? Do you feel angry? Do you feel sad? What are the things that come up for you? What do you think about when you feel stressed? You're moody, you're irritable, short tempered, that type of thing. What about physically? When you start to feel stressed, what do you feel in your body? Are you relaxed and loose? Are you breathing nice and easy? Or is it different? Typically, you're experiencing a higher heart rate. Your heart's beating faster because you're feeling that stress. You feel more uptight. You're feeling that. Uh, and then behavioral signs. The first couple are pretty big ones. I mean, these are all big, but for me specifically, I tend to delve into eating when I'm feeling stressed. Ice cream is my go to, right? I want that instant dopamine kick to feel a little bit better. The challenge is when I'm overdoing it. Every once in a while is okay, but killing that gallon of ice cream, not a good idea. Maybe not a gallon, pint, I'll do that. But also, sleep is impacted, right? If you're waking up at night, if you're going to bed late, trying to wake up early, whatever it is, sleep is going to get hit, which is a major disservice to our ability to recharge and recover when we're stressed. So I'll let you look through these things, but this is what I want to get into. So this is a psychology theory called the inverted U theory. This talks about the amount of stress in correlation to how well we perform. And it basically says that there is an optimal level of performance in relation to stress. So on the left-hand side of this chart here, the calm area, we're not being challenged enough. We're not experiencing enough stress. In fact, we could be bored. We could be just underwhelmed. And it leads to some lethargy and lack of action. As we move up and increase the stress, as we're experiencing that in relation to a task at hand, we start to feel more energized. We start to feel focused. We start to feel challenged. We start to feel like we're in the flow state, if you're aware of what that is. Flow state is when you're working on something and you're so locked in and focused on it that you're feeling energized, you're feeling challenged, like you're feeling like you're competent, you're learning, you're growing, you're contributing. Everything else starts to fade away. So you start to get so locked in that decisions just happen automatically. And you feel like everything is coming to you in this amazing way. Time just disappears. You could work on something for 4 hours and realize and feel like it's only been 15 minutes, right? The challenge is when we're in that mode so long that it starts to lose and diminish on its returns because we start to get fatigued. We need to recharge. We get exhausted. We're working towards burnout. So the idea here is to understand what's your ideal level of stress, what's your ideal level of energy state that helps you be in that flow, ideal state of optimal performance, right? That's what I help people with. We help to define that. We help to create the situations, the environments that lead to that optimal performance state. But it's not an easy task, especially when we haven't trained our minds and we have so much life experience, work experience behind us that really has created all these patterns that become challenges to one, be aware of and then change, right? So let's talk about what stresses you out. I'd really like to understand from your standpoint in your job, what stresses you out? What takes you out of feeling great and feeling like you're contributing and producing or performing? One of the things, I'll get things started. So I hear a lot about, and I experience myself, useless or waste of time meetings. How many have experienced those? When a meeting gets thrown on your calendar and you look at it and you're like, what's the point of this meeting? There's no agenda. There's no like expected outcomes that we're trying to create. It doesn't need to be an hour long or 30 minutes long. We could do this via email over 5 minutes, right? Those types of things drive people nuts, including myself. So we go through that. So what stresses you out? We'll list those out. And then coming into this, we're going to get into an aspect of, are these things that you're experiencing, is this all on you? Is this your problem alone? Or what's the deal? So the consulting answer is it depends. So it may be some on you, but research shows that it's a dual pronged issue. Part of the issue is on you because most of us, like I say, have not done the work to really train the mental skills on how to perform. Those things include self awareness, communication, leadership, um, energy management, our identities. You are not your job, for the Fight Club quote. Team building. There's a variety of skills that we can train. Interpersonal skills. How do you relate to others? How do you relate to yourself? Do you have self-compassion and self-care for yourself. That is the first and utmost thing. It's like when you're in an airplane and they do the safety protocol before the flight takes off, and they say when the oxygen mask drops down, put yours on first in order for you to help somebody else. Because if you lose oxygen, you're no good to try to help anybody else because you're done. Same thing applies here. So first we need to make sure we're taking care of yourself, but then we start to build things out within your department. Because if you're in a toxic workplace that is not, it's helping to facilitate the high stress in the environment. The challenge becomes you may not have full control to change that environment, but you do have the ability to influence. This is a critical skill for leadership, is influencing others. We'll get into that later. So the symptoms of burnout. First and foremost, we talked about when you got to that far right side, when you're leading towards exhaustion and burnout, emotional and physical exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion is when you really don't have the capacity to interact with other people. You're short-fused, you're irritable, you bark at people, right? The physical exhaustion, you don't want to get off the couch or get out of bed. You're so tired that the thought of getting up and doing anything is almost impossible, right? Cynicism. This aspect of a negative response to your job where you care less and less about how well you perform because the benefit that you received from the job is far less than the stress and the pain that you're enduring in your job, right? So that becomes a challenge to perform. And then there's this aspect where you're just constantly your worst critic. So one of the things that we focus on in this work is from a self-awareness standpoint is how do you talk to yourself? So we all have that voice on our shoulders that's a self-sabotaging, self-defeating, I'm not good enough. Why does this always happen to me? It's because I suck. That voice versus the other shoulder, which is the positive, uplifting, encouraging, and confident voice that we need to really lean into. The challenge is we have so many things, social media, the news media, all these things that really create this concept that there's so much bad in the world, and that's what we tend to focus on, opposed to that positive, uplifting voice that we all have and we all need, right? So a quick aspect to how our brains work. Another psychology theory here is the threat versus challenge theory. This gets into the concept of when you're confronted with a task or an obstacle, something that you need to deal with, do you look at it as a threat or as a challenge? When we look at something as a threat, it means that there's a possibility that that thing could cause us harm, if not kill us, right? Back in the day, the threat used to be us out in the wild as cave people hunting and gathering or foraging food just to survive. And so if we're out there, our brain was constantly scanning the environment for anything that would harm us or kill us, right? Saber-toothed tigers, bears, whatever. And so we're programmed. Millions of years of programming and biological evolution where our brain, our operating system has not been updated, right? So we no longer have the threat of something out in the wild unless you're living in a remote area. But we traditionally now in the United States, we don't have things that are trying to kill us. Our threats now are other people's opinions, expectations, and judgments. I'll say that again. Our threats today are other people's opinions, expectations, and judgments. They all have what we perceive to be an impact on our safety and well-being. So the challenge then becomes, as a good lead in for this, is do we look at that task or obstacle or thing that we need to do as a threat versus can we look at that as a challenge? Athletes often talk about like right before they're about ready to compete. A lot of athletes that kind of understand this concept, some would say, I feel really nervous. I don't know how I'm going to perform. Another athlete might say, I'm excited. I'm ready to go. I've trained for this. I'm ready to showcase everything that I've learned and put into this, right? That aspect of looking at something as a challenge means you may have the skills to overcome that challenge, or you may need to learn some skills or pull in some resources, but at some point you're going to overcome that challenge. It's not going to overtake you. So it becomes taking that lion and looking at it as more of a kitten that you can play with. It's kind of a bad, I don't know if it's a bad analogy or weak, but that's the concept, right? So, how do we start to impact that thing? So, going back to this, when you are in survival mode, when you are feeling distress, and the moment or a long period of time that's chronic, what's happening with your body? We talked about some things, right? Your heart rate increases, your heart's beating faster. To your brain, that's a signal to your brain that there is something wrong and that there is a threat that you are dealing with. Now, one of the ways that we can kind of hack into this is through sending a different, interrupting that signal to the brain through our breath work. So if our heart is beating fast and that's sending a signal to our brain that there's a threat, the immediate thing that we can go to is box breathing. So Navy SEALs use this as a method of doing just that. When they're in a high intensity situation, a high distress situation, which they often are when they're on missions, they go to this as a means of doing that hack, right? So the idea here is that you're breathing in through your nose. When we're taking short, shallow breaths, the breathing is usually up in our chest. It's higher up. That's why our shoulders raise up to our ears. If we take a large inhale, filling up our stomach, and exhale, you'll start to feel your shoulders drift down away from your ears towards the floor. So when we do this, we think about counting to 5, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, inhaling through the nose, filling up the stomach and the chest, counting to 5 or through a 5 count, and then holding at the top of that breath. Once we do that and go through a cycle of this, it automatically slows your heart rate down, sending a signal to your brain that things are okay, that we're no longer in that survival instinct mode. We're not in that threat state, but we have the ability to connect back into our problem solving, our critical thinking capacities to be able to relax just for a moment. And then that gives us some ability to take a step away from the stimulus that's leading to our stressor and be able to give space for us to choose how we want to respond. It's an extremely, extremely simple but effective skill to automatically change that processing of the information or the stress environment that you're dealing with, right? So, this is not only something that you can use during your workday, it's also something you can use when you transition from thing to thing. So, for example, I'm providing this session right now from a custom shed in my backyard that I built during COVID. This is my work office. It's right in the backyard. But my household is my wife, 2 teenagers, a dog, and a cat. It's usually very chaotic in my household. So when I transition from here to there, I take this a few rounds of this box breath and I set my intention before going into the house. Because I know that if I don't do that, the chaos of that environment is going to lead me to be angry, frustrated, irritated, whatever. I don't want to show up that way. I want to show up as somebody that's contributing in a positive manner and modeling positive behavior in my household. So I take this proactive step to do that for that situation, right? You can use this from meeting to meeting. You can use this when you're dealing with an important presentation to the board, whatever it is, right? So what I'd like to do is get some thoughts on where could you actually apply and use this type of concept, right? Some of this gets into self-awareness generation of how do you feel, what causes you stress in your job? Is it the meetings? Is it people? What is the areas or the things that cause you stress? And then creating a game plan for it. And this is a simple game plan on how do I want to show up moment to moment? What is going to happen is when you start doing that, you start showing up differently and you start showing up to people around you as somebody that is in control and able to regulate your mental and emotional states much more effectively than others around you. They're going to want to know how you're doing this, and now you have something to teach them as well. So, this is the first start in this journey. So, my goal in this is I don't want to just give some high level fluff that you're going to say, well, this seems like a generic commercial, infomercial type thing. I'd much rather get something out of it. So, I'd like to find out and suggest that you use this and think about each day between now and next week, because hopefully you'll come back. We have another session, but we have 3 more sessions that are free of charge that you will get something out of it like this every time. It may be more than, it may be less impactful, but you will have skills that the general population does not have access to or does not use. So take some time, think about that. And then lastly, I will hit on this every time because this needs to be reiterated and reinforced. These are the pillars of self-care or recovery in terms of how to stay invigorated, energized, recharged. Sleep. We need to ensure that we're getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night, something like that. So it depends on your environment. If you have questions on how to do that, let me know. Thinking well. Everything we just went through is how do we think positively, productively in a way that's going to support and serve us in terms of how we want to show up and the person we want to be. Moving well. This is stuff that we need to exercise. Everybody knows we need to do it, but this is not, it doesn't have to be intense. You can be walking 3 days a week for 30 minutes baseline in order to get the movement that you need for minimal benefit. There are other things that we do as we get older. We start to lose type 2 tissue, which is the stuff that allows us to slow down when we step down from a stair or the curb. As we get older and into our elder years, that type 2 tissue starts to minimize and diminish. That's why people fall and break their hips or break bones. So strength conditioning, cardio, walking, exercising. I do Tai Chi and yoga. I get a lot of benefit out of those. I'm happy to discuss any of those with you if you have any questions. And then eating and hydrating well. Our industry is rife with whining and dining. So fancy dinners, alcohol, whiskey tastings, breweries, all of that stuff. There's a place for it. However, depending on what your mission and purpose is in life, it may not serve you. So those are things to be mindful of. With that, that's all I'm going to say for today. Feel free, please give me feedback. What would you like more of? What would you like less of? And then I encourage you to practice that breathing between now and next week. Do it daily, because the more that we reinforce and practice this, the more it becomes a skill. Thank you very much.